Hello and welcome back to the Track Scene, the show that gives you previews and reviews for events here at the Adrian Flux Arena. I'm your host Ronan Coleman, and today, for this episode, we've got something a little bit different. As today, we're going to give you a little preview / review on the progress in the road to gold for the 2-litre banger Trackstar World Championship. So in this episode, we'll be talking about the 4 previous events with the 2-litre bangers and talk about who won each race, the best entertainers, and building up to this 2-litre banger War of the Worlds event and the 2-litre bangers at Victor's Weekend at the end of the month. Those 2 events coming up on the fixture list are the last 2 events that the 2-litre bangers could gain points before they face the battleground again for the Trackstar World Championship. But how did we get to this point? Well, this is the episode for you, so sit back, relax, and let's get reviewing. For the first round, we went a bit old school with the Bilge Bonanza, which took place on August the 2nd in 2025. This event saw plenty of classic tin and plenty of action on display, with micro bangers, 1600 bangers, 2-litre bangers, and the unlimited bangers. But sticking with the 2-litre bangers, we start off with heat number 1. Now, right off the gate, we got to see a highlight from 2 drivers, and that came from 332 Callum Henderson and 843 Jacob Foster. 332 Callum Henderson was the first to show right out the gate when he did a good following to 740 Connor Teakle, which caused Connor to collide with Reliant Robin start 106 Ollie Betts. This opened the door for 843 Jacob Foster to oblige with a big hit. However, 332 Callum Henderson wasn't finished just yet, as he came back round the track right in front of the pit gate, he gave a monster shot to 639 Paul Vines. After what was a very chaotic start, it was none other than the Damage Inc. man, 548 Big Al Alex Utting, who was next to show and was next to put in a couple of big hits. On the back straight, 113 Dan Wright span 843 Jacob Foster, and 548 Big Al Alex Utting then obliged with a T-bone. Then a couple of laps later, Big Al would go in with another big hit when he picked up the Welly man, number 98 Jake Wilson, and ploughed him into turn 2. While that was all going on, the 2024 National Points Champion number 69 Brad Bartram was avoiding everyone on the track and was able to keep it going and take victory in heat number 1. So in heat number 1, your results were as follows. Number 69 Brad Bartram was your winner. 548 Alex Utting, after an entertaining performance, came home in 2nd. 801 Jack Foster came home in 3rd. Number 10 Warren Lown came home in 4th. The 2025 Auto Speed World Champion Johnny James in 362 came home in 5th. 518 Kieran Kinghorn came home in 6th. 128 Andrew Ship came home in 7th. 132 Robert James came home in 8th. 165 Ben Randall came home in 9th, and 843 Jacob Foster would come home in 10th. In what was a very fast-paced heat number 1, it was time for heat number 2, and boy did they up the ante when it came to the entertainment. Right from the word go, there was a bit of trouble on the final corner, and number 98 Jake Wilson got a big hit from Ben Randall, which then left the door open for 843 Jacob Foster to go in with a jack up, and then 337 Ashley Garrard came in to put in the final blow. And over on turn 2, Kieran Kinghorn had ended up going into the wall, and Nathan Pinder then went in with a jack up. But all this did was open the door for 548 Big Al Alex Utting to go in and plough through the back of Pinder. After this hit, the red flags were called. On the restart, it was 113 Dan Wright who would lead them off. You could say he was in the right place. On the restart, the action continued, and 801 Jack Foster was putting the bumper in to Connor Teakle, but with Connor Teakle losing control on the back straight, the damaging duo of Alex Utting and Toby Parfitt then put their bumpers to good use and put in a couple of okay hits on the back. As the race continued, 106 Ollie Betts was still going round, but unfortunately one of the back wheels was hanging off, which was causing it to slow down immensely, which 801 Jack Foster thought he would help by giving him a bit of a bump start. But as he came round to the home straight, Big Al was thinking of a different kind of bump start and gave him a massive hit. And straight after this happened, Toby Parfitt in 742 would do one of the biggest hits of the day for the 2 litre bangers by giving a monster follow-in to 843 Jacob Foster on turn 2. And as he was sitting there, we all thought Connor Teakle was going to get his revenge on the Damage Inc. duo. But as Teakle went in for the shot, Toby Parfitt had moved. But now that Teakle was now the sitting duck, we were all wondering if it was going to be a Damage Inc. driver to go in the back. Quite surprisingly, it was the old school veteran in Andrew Topham in 886 who obliged with the big jack up. But as he was sitting there, we all knew what was going to happen next. And as he came round turn 1, 548 Big Al Alex Utting, like a hawk, saw his target, came round wide and gave a massive hit to Andrew Topham. And if things weren't bad enough for Topper, 829 J Sharp then decided he would have another go and gave a big hit to Topper to finish his day off. And then out of nowhere, 740 Connor Teakle had got back running again, and this was a bad decision because 132 Robert James decided I'll give Teakle a massive tickle. But while all that chaos was going on, there was a massive battle for the lead. 113 Dan Wright was leading the way the entire race, but Brad Bartram was on his tail on the final lap. And as they entered the back straight, Brad Bartram closed in like a snake hunting for its prey, launched Dan Wright wide, and it was a photo finish to the end, but somehow Brad Bartram, the 2024 National Points Champion, would come home to win his second race. And your results in heat number 2 goes as follows. 69 Brad Bartram would take the win. 113 Dan Wright was in second. 362 Johnny James in third. 337 Ashley Garrett in fourth. Number 10 Warren Lown would come home in fifth. 128 Andrew Ship in sixth. 548 Big Al Alex Utting would come home in seventh. 132 Robert James would come home in 8th, and there was no other finishers after a much more hectic heat. And then it was all down to the grand final. Now this was a much more fast-paced affair than the previous 2 races. This was all about the driving ability more than the crashing. Unfortunately for one driver, he became a victim of everyone else. And that went to the welly man, Jake Wilson. As everyone was driving fast and fearless throughout the race, Jake Wilson was slowing right down on the back straight, and 742 Toby Parfitt gave a whopper of a hit on the back, which put a lot of damage to his car. Jack Foster in 801 then decided to spin out Nathan Pinder, and as Jake Wilson tried to get back into the race again, unfortunately for him, he was just not quick enough, and 829 Jay Sharp put in a massive hit. Jake then got a hit from Dan Wright as well, and Jay Sharp also went in on Nathan Pinder, who was lurking on the final corner. The red flags were called in the interest of safety for Jake Wilson, and thankfully all was okay. On the restart, it was number 10 Warren Lown who was leading them off, with 69 Brad Bartram in second and Johnny James in third. Now on the restart, number 10 was able to pull away from everyone else, and Brad Bartram unfortunately seemed to have some mechanical gremlins, which slowed him right down. This opened the door for 362 Johnny James to put that gold roof to work, and he did. With number 10 going wide on the final corner, Johnny James snipped through the inside, kept his head down, and continued drifting his way to victory. And in the grand final, your results were as follows. 362 Johnny James was your winner. Number 10 Warren Lown was in second. 548 Alex Hutting in third. 113 Dan Wright in fourth. 801 Jack Foster in fifth. 128 Andrew Ship in sixth. 69 Brad Bartram in seventh. 337 Ashley Garrett in eighth. 132 Robert James in ninth, and there was no other finishers in the grand final result. Which means there was only one thing left to do. Let's wreck and roll with the Destruction Derby. Now the first to show was Ashley Garrett, who had parked it next to Nathan Pinder, and Brad Bartram thought, I'll have some of that, and gave a good hit to the back of Ashley Garrett. Then Robert James set upon Toby Parfitt and spun him right round on turn 1. Brad Bartram then caught up to Paul Vines and gave him a nice little hit on the back. Paul Vines then went on opposite, and this was a bad move because Toby Parfitt was right there to go on opposite and give him a hit. But as Toby Parfitt turned 180 degrees, Brad Bartram was there to give him a hit up the back, and then Robert James followed up to give Brad Bartram a hit on the back. And as Paul Vines sat there on the exit of the home straight, Connor Teakle, with one hit left in him, gave a whopping head on. And as Big Al was getting picked up, we all knew where Big Al's destination was, and he found it as he went ploughing into both Paul Vines and Connor Teakle. Surprisingly, 740 Connor Teakle still had a little bit of power left. Dan Wright then gave him a bit of a push into the wall, and as the back end sat there, Robert James came flying in with a massive hit, which was definitely one of the best hits of the day. Which meant when the 2024 National Points Champions came round to turn 2 and gave the jack up to Robert James, he had been declared the winner of the Destruction Derby. Brad Bartram would come back round to give one more final hit to conclude a fantastic day of action, meaning he won 2 heats and the DD. A fantastic effort from the 2024 National Points Champion. For the second event, it took place at our All Bangers Special, which was known as the Golden Gridlock event, which took place on October 18th, 2025, which featured the 1600cc bangers, the junior bangers, the unlimited lady bangers in their Gold Roof Championship, and of course the 2 litre bangers. Now in the previous event we talked about how there was some fast paced moments but a lot of action. Now this event was much more fast and furious, with some of the best drivers of today in a 2 litre banger battle. So let's talk about heat number 1. And there was a lot of spinners right from the word go, but the main highlights came from teammates. And the first one to show was 785 Dom Ambrose, who put in a nice little following to 174 David Osborne. As the pushing and shoving continued, a big moment happened at the exit of the home straight when 370 John Cabold picked up 623 Tricky Ricky Hutton, which picked up 512 Matt Armstrong, spun him into a tyre, and when the impact made him go in reverse, he collected 910 Jack Ruckard in the process, and Jack Ruckard was now a sitting duck on turn 2. Unfortunately for Jack Ruckard, in banger racing, you can't sit there too long, and it wasn't long until teammates member 830 Stretch Lee White came charging in with a big hit. Now 830 Lee White would reverse and get back into the race, and what was quite a twist in the tail was as 910 Jack Ruckard was about to reverse and rejoin the race, 39 Ryan Nibbs came in with a big hit. and the red flags came out in the interest of safety. On the restart, it was 507 Danny Boy Brown who was in the lead. With the racing now officially back underway, it did not take long before the action started all over again. And straight away, 214 Connor Osborne, getting a bit of revenge for the Osbornes, gave a big following shot to 785 Dom Ambrose. Now while that's going on, there was some good fast-paced action going on, with a great battle between 69 Brad Bartram and 623 Ricky Hutton. Dom Ambrose had got back running again after getting that following from Connor Osborne, and as he came back around, he saw David Osborne's car sitting there, so he thought, I'll have a bit of that, and gave him one last hit. But the battles continued, and Brad Bartram and Ricky Hutton had caught up to Danny Boy Brown, and it was a three-way battle between Brad Bartram, Danny Brown and Ricky Hutton. And with a few twists and turns, 69 Brad Bartram would get ahead. But with one lap to go, it was 370 John Cabold who was leading the way. But with 428 Nick Ashbridge too far away to really do anything, 370 John Cabold would come through and take a very clean victory in heat number 1. And your results in heat number 1 goes as follows. 370 John Cabold was your winner. 428 Nick Ashbridge was second. Third was 69 Brad Bartram. Fourth was 623 Ricky Hutton. Fifth was number 50 Reese Laybourne. Sixth was 507 Danny Brown. Seventh was 188 John Reeves. Eighth was 372 James Cable. Ninth was 128 Andrew Ship. And 10th was 830 Lee White. Now it's time for heat number 2. Now heat 1 had a lot more crashing than racing compared to this race, I'll have to be honest, but that's okay because this race was really showing the driving side of banger racing. 507 Danny Brown was able to get a great start right off the bat, with 428 Nick Ashbridge in second place after spinning out 512 Matt Armstrong on the back straight. As the race continued on, we got to see some great racing from the teammates team, and we also got to see Andrew Ship do well under the pressure. All eyes were on the front as the race continued. Nick Ashbridge was putting the bumper in on Danny Boy Brown, but nothing was phasing him. And after some great battling, all eyes were on the front of the pack as we entered the final lap. In a shocking twist in the tail, 507 Danny Brown really messed up the first corner and nearly hit a tyre. Thankfully he didn't, but Nick Ashbridge overtook him on turn 2. Now this was actually a mistake in Ashbridge's part, because all this did was open the door for Danny Brown to push him wide into the wall, and Danny Brown would come through to take victory in heat number 2 after a lucky escape on turn 1. But your results for heat number 2 goes as follows. 507 Danny Brown was your winner. 428 Nick Ashbridge would get his second. Third was 623 Ricky Hutton. Fourth was 552 Carl Douglas. Fifth was 370 John Cabold. Sixth was number 50 Reese Laybourne. Seventh went to 69 Brad Bartram. Eighth went to 830 Lee White. Ninth went to 128 Andrew Ship. And 10th went to 337 Ashley Garrard. And now it was time for the grand final Inter Destruction Derby, which was the last race of the night. Once again, this being a World Championship qualifying round, the expectations were high and the drivers were trying to use this opportunity to the max. A big battle at the front commenced right off the word go with Nick Ashbridge, Matt Armstrong and 507 Danny Brown. Unfortunately for those people at the front, they didn't realise they had a missile behind them, because 552 Carl Douglas was like a rocket around the Shaleway. As Carl Douglas caught up with 682 Ryan Cross, there was some big action on the home straight as 128 Andrew Ship got spun out by Lee White, but almost immediately rejoined the race. 552 Carl Douglas was now setting upon the third place spot, and Matt Armstrong in 512 was his target. Unfortunately, Matt Armstrong was having some steering issues, which meant it was really easy for Carl Douglas to overtake him. It didn't take long for Carl Douglas to then set upon Danny Brown to take on the second place spot. And while that intense racing was going on, there was some great battling going on at the back, with 248 Jamie Blything, 126 Daniel Bowley, number 28 Mac Bell, and 830 Lee White. Unfortunately, on the back straight, Blything lost control, meant he lost a lot of places on the closing stages. And in the final moments of the race, there was a fantastic battle for third place, with 370 John Cobold, 507 Danny Brown, and number 26 Daniel Holmes. 370 John Cobold launched himself into the middle of the duo, came round on the home straight, and unfortunately Danny Brown lost control and lost the third place spot. Unfortunately, at some point 428 Nick Ashbridge had broken down. That meant that 552 Carl Douglas had a very clean victory in the grand final. And the results for the grand final are as follows. 552 Carl Douglas was your winner. 370 John Cobold was in second. Number 26 Daniel Holmes came home in third. 713 Oscar Preston came home in fourth. 507 Danny Brown came home in fifth. 188 Victor John Reeves came home in 6th, 337 Ashley Garrard came home in 7th, 830 Lee White came home in 8th, 126 Daniel Bowley in 9th, and 785 Dom Ambrose came home in 10th. Now it was time for the Destruction Derby, and straight away the Osborne versus teammates war had arose again, because David Osborne decided to give a head-on to 785 Dom Ambrose. John Reeves was the first to show after the green flag dropped by spinning out Ryan Nibbs. John Reeves then used that opportunity while Nibbs was conked out, turned it around and gave him a jack up. And then it went from bad to worse for Ryan Nibbs, because Brad Bartram then was the next to go round, and he decided, I'll have a piece of that, and gave a big hit to Ryan Nibbs' car. Brad Bartram then continued on his way, with David Osborne not far behind on the hunt. David Osborne would then fall for a trap as Brad Bartram put the brakes on as David Osborne put a jack up in. Now 174 David Osborne did break out of Brad Bartram's trap, but unfortunately sustained some back wheel damage getting loose. This meant when 188 John Reeves came round onto the start finish line on opposite, it was easy pickings for the Dover boy veteran. Victor would pick up David Osborne and slam him into the wall. Brad Bartram then continued and gave Victor a nice little hit on the back, but he would have to do a lot more than that to finish off Victor. Victor then continued on and looked a lot healthier than the other two. David Osborne went round, saw Brad Bartram, gave him a nice little hit, and Victor came in and ploughed into David Osborne. But surprisingly, David Osborne's car still had a bit of fight left in him, and as David Osborne tried everything he could to stop Brad Bartram, 188 John Reeves would come round and give another big hit to the back of David Osborne. It had honestly seemed like John Reeves had this DD won, but after multiple head-ons, multiple jack-ups, somehow it was the 2024 National Points Champion sparking from the middle of his car who came out victorious in the DD, making that his second Destruction Derby victory in the road to gold. A nice day's action, very fast paced, but there was some great highlights in between. Now we move on to the third event, which finally took place in 2026, more specifically on March 21st, 2026. This was another all-banger special event known as Saturday Night Bangers. And just like the previous event, this event also featured the 1600cc bangers, the junior bangers, and the unlimited lady bangers. Now, if you thought those 2025 rounds were good, well, 2026 was about to prove you ain't seen nothing yet. Because right as the green flag dropped, they were already pushing and shoving. And 829 J Sharp would spin the duck, number 51 James Licorice, who had just come off a fantastic 2 seasons of winning the Entertainers League. And in 2026, he's hoping to be the first ever driver in Trackstar history to win it 3 years in a row. So keep that in mind as we go through these next 2 meetings. And it didn't take long before the notorious Damage Inc. versus Condoms display to happen once again on track, with Toby Parfitt spinning out Stuart Woodley into the traffic, which in turn caused Stuart Woodley to spin right round like a record. And in what was quite a scary moment on the home straight, Stuart Woodley would end up getting hit on the front of the car, spinning him sideways towards the wall. And in that moment, 126 Daniel Bowley came in with a monster hit on the back of his Mondeo. And straight after that massive moment happened, 517 Riley Taylor, the newest member of the Gladiators team, would pick up 318 Oliver Marshall and slam him hard into the wall. And the action wasn't finished yet, as Callum McKee would spin out 829 J Sharp into the dead car of 124 Robbie Marker. I mean, this race was all adrenaline on display, and as the race felt like it was going to get calmer, it got action-packed again, because 129 Joe Scatella put the brakes on hard on Toby Parfitt, which meant the always entertaining 404 Spook Luke Brinton would come in with a glancing blow at the back. And although there was some great driving from 519 Knuckles Lee Middleton, it was 129 John O'Brook who would take victory in heat number 1. So your results in heat number 1, after a very crash-tastic start, was 129 John O'Brook was your winner. Number 28 Mac Bell was in second. In third it was 519 Lee Middleton. 69 Brad Bartram came home in fourth. 743 Josh Parfitt came home in fifth. 742 Toby Parfitt will come home in sixth. Number 50 Reese Laybourne will come home in seventh. 312 Brad White came home in eighth. 339 Jack Garrett came home in ninth, and 572 Paul Scully will come home in 10th. Now we move on to heat number 2. At first you might think, oh, this is going to be like the previous round where it's going to be much more of a rod fest than a wreck fest. But then you remember there are Damage Inc. drivers on the track. And straight away Callum McKee went in on Toby Parfitt on turn 2. Now obviously this was during the hype of the Condoms versus Damage Inc. war. So straight away 743 Josh Parfitt was after Joe Scatella. Now Josh Parfitt did go on opposite on turn 2, and Scatella tried to go for a T-bone. Unfortunately for Joe, he unfortunately missed his target and ended up slamming into the wall. And after seeing this, 743 Josh Parfitt was about to go back round the right way round to go in for a hit for Scatella, but unfortunately he was too late, and before you knew it, number 51 James Licorice wanted a piece of the action and gave a big hit to Joe Scatella. But up next it was 829 J Sharp who was there to join the train, making his presence known and making his targets very clear for being one of the best entertainers of the year at King's Lynn. And just as J Sharp looked like he was going to be in the clear, 210 Callum McKee went in with a very hard shot which caused Jay Sharp to go into the back of Joe Scatella's car, sending them both airborne, and then Sharp burst into flames. And as Sharp was theoretically going out in a blaze of glory, 372 James Cable would put in the final hit before the red flags were called in the interest of safety to extinguish the flames beneath the bonnet. On the restart, it was 507 Danny Brown who was leading them off, with 404 Spook Luke Brinton in second, and number 28 Mac Bell not far behind in third. On the restart, there was a great battle between Mac Bell, Dom Ambrose and Spook, and just like last time, 507 Danny Brown would come through on the final corner and take another heat victory in this Road to Gold series. And your results for Heat 2 goes as follows. 507 Danny Brown was your winner. 28 Mac Bell would get his second. Third was 404 Luke Brinton. Fourth went to 337 Ashley Garrett. Fifth went to 129 John O'Brook. Sixth went to 248 Jamie Bliving. Seventh went to 312 Brad White. Eighth went to 785 Dom Ambrose. Ninth went to 742 Toby Parfitt. And 10th went to 372 James Cable. And now on to the main event of the day, which was the grand final into Destruction Derby. And straight away, James Licorice and Jay Sharp were continuing to entertain and continue their battle, as James Licorice straight away disposed of Jay Sharp in a little spin. And in an almost repeat of the previous round, 552 Carl Douglas was like a rocket out on track. Even with the bat markers coming into play, nothing fazed him. There was some great racing overall with Reese Laybourne, John Cobold, Mac Bell and the Parfitts. And even though all the drivers were trying very hard to catch up to Carl Douglas, with some superb driving done by all the drivers, including the national points champion Ashley Garrett, it was not enough. And just like last round, 552 Carl Douglas would come home to take victory in the grand final. And your results in that fast-paced grand final went to 552 Carl Douglas was your winner. Second went to 370 John Cobold. In third spot was 517 Riley Taylor. In fourth went to 129 John O'Brook. 312 Brad White came home fifth. 340 Wesley Freestone came home in sixth. 742 Toby Parfitt came home in seventh. 337 Ashley Garrett came home in eighth. Number 28 Mac Bell came home in ninth. And 126 Daniel Bowley came home in 10th. And now it was time for the Destruction Derby to close off the day's action. And 3 drivers took part in the DD, with John Cobold, Josh Parfitt and 829 Jay Sharp. Well, I say 829 Jay Sharp, he was limping across the corner, and as he was coming around the final corner, John Cobold came flying in like a missile and slammed him into the wall. But as John Cobold was about to turn it around to go after Parfitt, Parfitt was already there to give a big head on. And with a lot of misfire on the exhaust of John Cobold and Jay Sharp were out in a very, very quick Destruction Derby. That's one way to get it over and done with. And that concluded all the action from a much more crash-tastic domestic round for the 2 litre bangers. And now we move on to the Team East Anglia versus Team Rest of the UK special, which took place on May the 4th, 2026. This featured the Micro Bangers EA versus the Rest of the UK special as well. The TSR Bangers. However, the main attraction, of course, on the Bank Holiday Monday was the 2 litre Saloon Stock Car English Championship. Now, in those 3 previous rounds, we had got a great idea on who was going in for the national points and who was going for the Entertainers League. And going into this event, the drivers had to think very carefully and strategize what they were going to do if they were going to get some good points going into the Road to Gold. And this had a lot of action. Straight away, the likes of James Licorice was pushing and shoving. We had a massive hit with 512 Matt Armstrong. And as he was sitting there, 210 Callum McKee came with a monster hit to the back of Matt Armstrong. Callum McKee in the previous round was already showing some great entertainment. But this race, fans, was the defining moment where Callum McKee may have secured his place in the World Championship qualifying rounds through Entertainers League, because this was a monster hit. But of course, like every team meeting, the action didn't stop there, and 51 James Licorice, representing Team EA, was on opposite, and he gave a big hit to 312 Brad White. But Licorice was out for blood, and straight away, while he was on opposite, he thought, well, I'm already here on opposite, and there's a car who's my nemesis coming towards me, I might as well go in for a hit. And a hit he did, as he gave a great hit to number 26 Daniel Holmes on opposite, hitting the back wheel. And the hits continued with 372 James Cable and 113 Alex Exton got slammed into the pile up with Matt Armstrong. But now the action turned to turn 1 and 2, as 687 Ryan Cross was the first to show by putting in a massive following to 310 Steve Cornell. Then 171 Andy Frost decided he wanted to go on opposite to give someone the coup de grace, but unfortunately for him, 519 Knuckles Lee Middleton decided, I'll have a go at you first before you have a go at me. The drama continued with number 51 James Licorice trying to go after Martin Baxter, but unfortunately clipping a dead car in the process. But things would get worse for James Licorice, as his own teammate of Robert James would accidentally get tangled up, and this opened the door for 210 Callum McKee to go in with a massive jack up. At the same time, 428 Nick Ashbridge would come flying in to give Robert James a big shot as well. As Callum McKee was reversing off and was turning into a bit of a sauna, number 93 Lewis Godfrey would go in with a shot on Callum McKee. But the race had to end eventually, and the race did end with 248 Jamie Blythin taking victory for Team EA. So the results in heat number 1 goes as follows. 248 Jamie Blythin was your winner. Number 69 Brad Bartram was second. 370 John Cobold was in third. 469 Martin Baxter came home in fourth. Number 50 Reese Laybourne came home in fifth. And there was no other finishers in heat number 1. Now it's time for heat number 2, and the action took off to a great start right from the word go with 843. John Sampson Cook getting spun out on the home straight. Number 26 Dan Holmes was then collected in the process, and this opened the door for number 51 James Licorice to go in with a big hit. Then from out of nowhere, 370 John Cobold would pick up Reese Laybourne and slam him into the back of Lee Middleton, but also slammed Laybourne hard into the plating. This would actually knock out John Cobold from the race. But from the other end of the track, 687 Mark Cross would go in with a following of his own to 642 Reed Cox. So Team EA looking very much the ones who were getting the biggest hits of the day so far. The red flags would come out in the interest of safety. And on the restart, it was 519 Lee Middleton who would lead the way for the rest of the UK. 69 Brad Bartram of Team EA was in second. And 310 Steve Cornell was in third position for the rest of the UK. Steve Cornell was the earliest to get destroyed as he was set upon early. Unfortunately for 519 Lee Middleton, there was just not enough teammates to go around, and eventually number 51 James Licorice would go on opposite on the final corner and give a monster hit on the side of his car. After Lee Middleton got disposed of, there was only really one or two Team Rest of the UK drivers left, and Team EA knew this, and that is exactly why Brad Bartram kept his wits about him and kept going the right way round. But on the wrong way round was 848 Sean Lown, and he pounced on the unsuspected number 17 Billy Taylor and completely knocked the back wheel all out of sorts. And with that, the Team Rest of the UK was completely disposed of, and that meant the rest of the drivers representing Team EA were battling it out for better points positions. Well, it was number 69 Brad Bartram who would come round to take victory in heat number 2. And your results in heat number 2 are as follows. Number 69 Brad Bartram was your winner. 521 Lee Dace was in second. 248 Jamie Bliving in third. 337 Ashley Garrett in fourth. 713 Oscar Preston in fifth. 687 Mark Cross in sixth. 843 John Sampson Cook will come home in seventh. And 132 Robert James would come home in eighth. And there was no other finishers in the race. Last but not least, the grand final Inter-Destruction Derby for Team East Anglia versus Team Rest of the UK. Now, by this point, you sort of know where this is going. Team EA had been dominating the meeting all throughout the day, and this time it was time for them to wreck and roll and let the hounds loose as they pounced on Team Rest of the UK one final time. Well, as the green flag dropped, they all hounded towards the pit gate area and multiple drivers were slammed into the wall. 312 Brad White got the worst of it after getting set upon by James Cable and Mark Cross. Then the Dover Boy man in 372, James Cable, picked up 428 Nick Ashbridge and slammed him into the wall, which broke Ashbridge's steering. It really did seem like Team Rest of the UK were dropping like flies, and they were. With Team EA knowing that the battle was won, they were on a pleasant cruise to see who would get some better points positions in the grand final. 312 Brad White was the only driver left for Team Rest of the UK in the grand final. However, unfortunately, he fell for an old-fashioned trap as 337 Ashley Garrett was slow on the corner and Brad White decided to give him a hit, and this opened the door for 687 Mark Cross to go in to give the final shot in the grand final part of the meeting. On the final lap, it was a fantastic battle between Jamie Bliving and Brad Bartram to the finish line. Jamie Bliving pushed Brad Bartram wide and came through to take another victory. So your results in the grand final were as follows. 248 Jamie Bliving was your winner. 69 Brad Bartram was second. 370 John Cabold would finish in third. 372 James Cable was fourth. 713 Oscar Preston would finish in fifth. 687 Mark Cross would finish in sixth. 51 James Licorice would finish in seventh. 337 Ashley Garrett would finish in 8th, and the only Team Rest of the UK representative in the grand final to finish was 312 Brad White, who finished in 9th. And then it was time for the Destruction Derby, and Callum McKee was the first driver to appear on opposite looking for some revenge. He got a big hit from Robert James. 51 James Licorice was the next to put in a big hit, and Brad Bartram came in with a stonking hit. John Cabold then joined in on the train, and then Mark Cross decided to join in on the train. It was a Team East Anglia wrecking train on turn 2. Martin Baxter would go in with a head-on of his own, but it was number 93, Lewis Godfrey, that everyone was concerned about, and the red flags were called in the interest of safety. The green flag struck again, and Robert James was immediately hit by Brad White. And Brad White knew what he was getting himself into, joining in the Destruction Derby. On the back straight, 687 Ryan Cross span out 469 Martin Baxter, and this was a great move from Cross because this opened the door for 370 John Cobold to go in with a hit, and Robert James would come in with a hit of his own on opposite as well. But Brad White knew that his meeting was pretty much finished, so he saw Matt Armstrong's car and gave it a whopping hit. Robert James then came in with a head-on, and Mark Cross would give in the final blow on the back. But John Cobold would go in with an even bigger hit on the back of Mark Cross. Somehow Martin Baxter and Brad White had both got it back running again. But unfortunately the damage was already done, and Brad White was disposed of immediately. Martin Baxter wasn't finished though, and he came in with an oppo shot to Robert James. Martin Baxter, somehow being the Lone Ranger of the group still going, then gave a good hit to John Cobold. But then there was Ashley Garrett, the National Points Champion, left running. And in the DD, it was Ashley Garrett, John Cobold and Martin Baxter for the finish. John Cobold had little steering and took a couple of good hits from Ashley Garrett. Ashley Garrett then gave a hit to Martin Baxter. And when it was all said and done, 337 Ashley Garrett was the winner of the Destruction Derby. Now we've talked about the past, let's get ready for the future. And before we go into this next event, let's talk about the points going into it. Now it is the top 15 point scoring drivers, regardless of promotion they race at, qualify for the World Final. Now we have 2 point charts. We have the 2 Litre Banger World Qualifying Points, and we have the 2 Litre Banger World Entertainer Qualifying Points. First up, let's talk about the 2 Litre Banger World Qualifying Points. At the moment, your points leader is number 69, Brad Bartram, with 177 points. In second, it's 337, Ashley Garrett, with 159 points. In third, it's number 50, Reese Laybourne, with 157 points. In fourth, it's 128, Andrew Shipp, who has 130 points. In fifth, it's 132, Robert James, with 122 points. In sixth, it's 370, John Cobold, with 115 points. In seventh, it's 340, Wes Freestone, with 113 points. In eighth, it's 552, Carl Douglas, with 109 points. In ninth, it's 126, Daniel Bowley, with 97 points, and is actually the highest visitor on the list. In 10th, it's 512, Matt Armstrong, with 92 points. In 11th, it's number 26, Dan Holmes, with 88 points. In 12th, it's 699, Aaron Nelson, with 88 points. In 13th, it's 248, Jamie Blything, who has 85 points. In 14th, it's 372, James Cable, with 84 points. And last but not least, in 15th, on the last spot so far, is number 28, Mac Bell, with 82 points. And if you're curious, below him in 16th spot is 507, Danny Brown, with 81 points. And in 17th and 18th, you've got Mark Cross and Sean Lown, who both have 80 points. And then in 19th, you have 312, Brad White, with 79 points. And in 20th, we have 428, Nick Ashbridge, with 78 points. And finally, let's talk about the entertaining qualifying points, which again, top 15 scoring drivers, regardless of promotion, will qualify for the World Final. In the lead, it's number 69, Brad Bartram, with 335 points. In second, it's 370, John Cobold, with 255 points. In third, it's 132, Robert James, with 245 points. In fourth, it's 829, Jay Sharp, with 225 points. In fifth, it's 51, James Licorice, with 225 points. In sixth, it's 687, Mark Cross, with 205 points. In 7th, it's 210 Callum McKee with 185 points. In 8th, it's 337 Ashley Garrett with 170 points. In 9th, it's 742 Toby Parfit with 160 points. In 10th, it's 372 James Cable with 150 points. In 11th, it's 548 Alex Utting with 145 points. In 12th, it's 312 Brad White with 115 points. In 13th, it's 830 Lee White with 105 points. In 14th, it's 469 Martin Baxter with 105 points. And in 15th spot, so the final number to qualify, it's 699 Aaron Nelson with 100 points. But below him in 16th place, it's 165 Ben Randall with 95 points. In 17th, it's number 50 Reese Laybourne with 95 points. In 18th, it's 843 Jacob Foster with 90 points. In 19th spot, it is 910 Jack Ruckard with 90 points. And in 20th, it's 39 Ryan Nibbs with 90 points. And everyone underneath has either got 90 points or under. And that is just a preview of what is yet to come, as we've got 2 more rounds of 2 litre banger action before their world final meeting in August. The first one comes on June the 13th with the 2 litre banger War of the Worlds meeting. That should be another crash-tastic event, just like the Team EA versus Team Rest of the UK event. But the last round for the 2 litre bangers happens on June 28th during John Victor Reeves' testimonial weekend, where we've got the 20 versus 20 with the 2 litre bangers. But the most important one is the old school 2 litre bangers. So we're going back to where we began. We're going old school to complete the road to gold. Best of luck to everyone involved. Good luck to your particular favourites. Good luck to them all. And that is the road to gold. Thank you everyone so much for watching. I've been your host Ronan Coleman. Signing you off for now. Trackstar Racing over and out.